Adolf Hitler rose to power because he won the majority of the German vote. That is false. The Nazis never actually won the majority of votes in any election on a national scale. True or false? Kristallnacht literally means night of broken glass and refers to anti-Jewish riots in Germany. That is true. Blitzkrieg refers to the Nazi strategy of lightning war, in which different parts of the army work together to quickly take territory and defeat the enemy. That is true. Barbarossa is the term for the Soviet Union's invasion of Germany. That is false. It's reversed. It was Germany who invaded the Soviet Union. The term is correct. As an aside, Barbarossa was the name of a crusading German king. Franklin Roosevelt was the President of the United States and Winston Churchill the Prime Minister of Great Britain, England, during World War II. This always bugs me that I forgot to finish this. Now, I could easily edit these things out, but my hope is that, if you see me doing things like that, you'll be like, okay, yeah, that helps me remember it better. In any case, profit from my mistakes. Einsatzgruppen were special German units used to round up and shoot Jewish people. That is very sad. It's also very true, alas. George Takei was a Japanese spy who was imprisoned because he informed the Japanese government about American defenses at Pearl Harbor. That is like doubly false. First of all, George Takei never did anything like that. He was a little kid during the attack on Pearl Harbor, but he and his family, nonetheless, because they were of Japanese ancestry, were interred and I believe lost their property. He also, by the way, you may say, well, who's George Takei? If you listen to the lecture, he's played Sulu in Star Trek. The other thing that's false is no Japanese American or Japanese person in the United States was ever found to have committed any such crime, right? So the Japanese Americans and people of Japanese descent who were residents in the United States were interred, even though none of them had actually done anything wrong. Right, so I want to stress this. It's not simply that George Takei wasn't a Japanese spy. There were essentially in the United States no Japanese spies. Hirohito was the emperor of Japan during World War II. That is true. Harry Truman encouraged a policy of containment, preventing the spread of communism while leaving it largely alone where it already existed. That is true. He didn't want to spread, but he also thought, if I try and push back against it, that could lead to World War III, which we don't want because a lot of people would die. Gamal Nasser was the leader of Egypt, whose terrible management of the Suez Crisis caused his country to be annexed by the Soviet Union. That is false. Gamal Nasser was leader of Egypt, whose terrific management of the Suez Crisis allowed him to gain control of the Suez Canal without any real negative repercussions. Martin Luther King was an important American civil rights activist who believed African Americans should suffer passively in order to obtain civil rights. That is false. He thought African Americans should suffer actively in order to obtain civil rights. You may say, well, how does that work? What it meant was that he would confront racism head on through peaceful marches. And then when, because of the racist social order, people would come out to defend that order and brutally attack African Americans who were doing nothing but marching peacefully, oftentimes in their Sunday best clothes. Thanks to the invention of television, lots of Americans seen that. They said, hey, this is really wrong. African Americans are people possessing human dignity and their rights should be respected. So he was arguing for active suffering. Dasha Khuubova believed that communism was the best system and would go to bed at night saluting their leader, so he knew that good people lived in her home. That is true. That came from that video about communism and hope to show how there were communists who believed deeply that their system was the right one. And as a little girl, she would do that, would salute towards a picture of the leader of the Soviet Union at the time. She thought he was this kind of all-knowing person who would see everything everywhere. So kind of similar to Stalin's cult of personality and terror, but not as horrible. Natasha Kuznetsov believed that all people in capitalist countries lived like Oliver Twist, but would later spend a lot of money to obtain genes. Not G's, genes. And that is true, right? She was able to see Western movies and things like that, but only if it served the propaganda purposes of the Soviet Union. And eventually she would come to reject that idea and would be attracted to the commercial culture of the West. Gail Halvorsen was an American pilot who provided chocolates to German children during the Soviet Berlin Blockade of Berlin. That is true. He was an American pilot. They called him the Chocolate Uncle or Uncle Wiggle Wings, who would throw chocolates out to German children while he was flying in his plane. He had little handkerchief parachutes. Mercedes Wilde turned to communism since she did not receive any of the Chocolate Uncle's chocolate. That is false. She did. She wrote him a letter, Gail Halvorsen, saying, whenever you drop the chocolate, I don't get any. Could you please help me? And then he sent her a box of chocolates. And so rather than becoming a communist, she thought the West was just great and wanted to be more like the Americans. And so we have to understand that this whole thing about the Berlin blockade by the Soviets and then the American and British airlift to help the Berlin people, the people in East Berlin, this was a major propaganda victory for the Americans. It made our system look really good. It made the Soviet system look really bad. Also made the British system look good, too. I want to stress they also helped with this. Anita Moeller believed that life was so good in communist East Berlin that she escaped there from capitalist democratic West Berlin through a tunnel. That is false. It should be reversed. She thought that she was living in communist East Berlin. Things were terrible. And then her brother helped build a tunnel leading from West Berlin so she could escape under the tunnel from East Berlin into West Berlin. Right. So she made the reverse trip. Gorbachev was a communist leader who used brutal tactics to keep the Soviet Union together. That is false. He was a reformist whose attempts to make the Soviet Union better led to its collapse, and he refused to use force to keep it together. Francis Fukuyama was an important American communist thinker. That is false. He was a capitalist liberal democratic thinker who believed that in the triumph of American-style democracy over communism. Mao Zedong followed radical policies based on revolutionary idealism in hopes of developing China's economy quickly, but failed to do so and killed millions in the process. That is true. Deng Xiaoping followed practical and technologically based reforms in order to develop China's economy and did so successfully. That is also true. The Tiananmen Square protest successfully led to China becoming a democracy. That is false. The Tiananmen Square protest was suppressed violently.